everyone from class here today. Najua tumezoea kuonana selt sana, so it's good to see us dressed and ready to have a good evening. So my name is Debbie Wangui Kihara. I am the class representative for the class before us today, and I also serve as the chairperson of the dinner committee. So the purpose of this session is basically to have a basic understanding of the parliamentary processes that happen and how they relate to engineers today. So as we know, Parliament is divided into two houses. We have the National Assembly and the Senate, and our guest here today is in Parliament. So as engineers, our work every day basically consists of using our problem-solving skills in structural, transport, water, public health. But as Mheshimiwa has mentioned, and also Engineer Kinoti, policy and governance plays a very important role in our development as engineers. So maybe to start us off, Mheshimiwa, tell us who is Ndindi Nyoro away from Parliament?
Thank you very much, Debbie. Ndindi Nyoro away from Parliament is Ndindi Nyoro. Basically, some of the things I enjoy doing is everything around investments. Investments take many fronts: private equity, venture capital. I don't think there is anything you can ask me about Nairobi Securities Exchange that I have not interacted with, because I've seen engineers can start things, but you can get a chance of owning them by investing in those ideas. And that is basically everything about venture capital, private equity, which I started doing since campus, in terms of NSC, but of course the other two later on. And of course from there, apart from investments, I was looking around to see the kind of football team people support here. Besides that, beside being in Parliament, beside investments, I also support Man U.
Okay, you also mentioned Xi Jinping.
Deng Xiaoping. Because I read a lot. I mean, anytime I'm not anywhere, you can be sure I am either holding a book or a magazine. If it's a book, it will be about economics. If it's about economics, majorly about Asia, because Asia relates more with Africa, only that they have gone ahead. If it's not that, you will always get a Forbes magazine in my vehicle, or there's a magazine called Entrepreneur, Economist, because I read them and I feel like I'm in holiday.
Okay, so paint us a picture then of the timeline of the budget making process from when it starts to completion, with mention of the budget review paper, the BPS, and finally the appropriation bill.
The planning of a country's financials or policies starts with a broader one, which is more encompasses a longer period. In Kenya, we have it called Vision 2030. Every country will have theirs. In China, for example, they made one in 2015 called Made in China 2025. Every country will have a longer term kind of planning. From there, it comes to medium term. Medium term is where you find something like BROP, that budget policy paper. It encompasses, let's say, depending on the country, majorly 5 years. And then from there, the country makes something called budget policy statement. It gives limits of expenditure for each department or MDA. And the very latest document that is made is called the estimates, which culminates into becoming the Appropriations Act when it is signed. It gives authority for those MDAs now to spend monies, public money. Now, the reason I have given that background is that because all are important. When a country starts deviating from making the current budget to address the vision that was made earlier, then growth becomes haphazard. Then secondly, as you may be aware as engineers, majority of the programs and projects of government are a multi-year. And therefore, if you make a budget that does not speak to last year's one and does not speak to the next financial year's one, then you may not end up making a coherent budget. The previous one has to be spoken to by this current one, and the future one has to find a voice in the current one. Because if, for example, Engineer Kenoti has a project that has a period of implementation of 3 years, then it needs to be spoken to by 3 budgets. That is why that happens. On the other side, the country comes up with something called the revenue-raising measures. In Kenya, it has come to be known as the finance bill. Now, the only thing that we need to look at as a country is that that kind of a bill should not be made every year. Because if every year investors foresee there will be changes in policy, either in taxation or in other policies affecting their businesses, they are not able to plan for the long term. So in many countries, and that is what used to happen in Kenya before, revenue-raising measures were not as drastic. We were able to make one that you can plan with for the next 5 years, only with small variations year on year, so that even you as an investor, you are able to work your medium-term plans based on a policy that may not change so suddenly.
Okay, so I have a specific question about the BPS. I know that the budget policy statement 2025, as you mentioned, it's guided by 2 things: the government agenda, that is better, bottom-up, and also the medium-term plan vision 2030. So allow me to ask then, for example, if you have a road project, the average lifespan of tarmac road flexible pavement is around 20 years. The maximum amount of years that a regime can have in this nation is 10 years. So should engineers really be guided by the government agenda, or should they be guided by the long-term plan? Because most of our projects, the lifespan goes into the hundreds of years. For example, dams.
I look at it in 2 ways in terms of engineers. One is in terms of profession, but second is in terms of self-interest. Starting with the self-interest, because that's what becomes an amalgamated macro perspective. I think for me, as if I were an engineer, I'd look at where can I fit in? And where can I fit in must be guided on where is the government going? Where is the spending going? Where is the policy going? I would, if I were you, I would look at how much is the government investing in what kind of infrastructure? How much is the government spending in roads? What is the projected spending in the road sector? How much is the government spending in the water and sewerage sector? What is likely to be the spending in the medium and longer term? That guides you to see where opportunities are likely to be. In terms of profession, versatility of the profession, of course, government policy is important. To look at, like what you've talked about, the longevity of our projects, so that, again, goes back to self-interest. You are able to tell between building and maintenance, what is the government giving more weight? And the reason I'm talking about government here is because you realize most of what you end up doing will be government funded. As civil engineer, yes, there are many private opportunities out there, but there are also equally as many around government. I would also look at the trend in terms of the private sector. For example, if you are an engineer in Singapore today, and you are a structural engineer for building houses, in an economy where 93% already own their own homes, you look at the opportunities which are available in that kind of a situation. If you are in Kenya, you can consume even data from KNBS. It's always very good. In fact, I always see, sorry for digressing. If, for example, I come here and quote figures from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, some people may think I'm already fighting those who are in government. Yet I'll be quoting the same figures made by a government institution. What I'm trying to say is that there is some data you can make good use of from Kenya National Bureau of Statistics because it enumerates so many facets around engineering, infrastructure, and everything else to see where the threats are also in the private sector insofar as your profession is concerned.
Okay. During...
And sorry, let me interrupt a little bit. There is something I talked about tech. You know, one good thing I love about how the world is, there is usually no stopping. Technology always comes to evolve things. Now, for example, everyone with a meter in Kenya, Yastima. I mean, there's no person paying a bill without a meter. But there is a description of those meters. Meaning, there used to be meters, for example, ile ya kitambo ya kutumiwa barua kwa posta. Now, technology came in with a new technology and therefore a new opportunity. Now, if our engineer, for example, in water sector, I'll look at how can I blend my knowledge. Take, for example, metering. We may say they are smart meters, but the beauty about technology, it keeps on upgrading. So you are able to look at where the opportunities are, and where there is lack of opportunity, actually is an opportunity by itself.
Okay. So during Engineer Kinotti's speech, he mentioned policy and the importance of policy and governance. And engineers may feel a little sidelined when it comes to policy making. What advice would you give us to fix ourselves in that process so that we feel like our ideas are being reflected, especially in the legislative arm of government?
There are many things you can do around there. In a country like Kenya that is rather quite open, there is nothing you cannot push to the floor of the House. And there are many routes to that. You can do it as a petition, as a private citizen, as an engineer. You can use a member of parliament to make a debate out of what you want made. But lastly, you also have an opportunity to be that person, being that MP. It is that open in Kenya. That even in the qualifications of how you get elected, you are not asked whether you have a course in politicking. That even an engineer is qualified to be there. And you have many of them in parliament.
I think that's a challenge to engineers in the room, that they should organize and make their voice heard as they wish it to be. So the last part of this session is to ask, so now you've spoken mostly from your national government point of view. So for the county governments, what role can they play in absorbing recent graduates from university, especially in development agendas? And what is your opinion on what can be done better to streamline this process?
Can I paraphrase?
Yes.
What is it that engineers can offer to county governments? Because you've asked what county governments can offer. And I'm asking that because we are always conditioned to look for an opportunity that is already defined. Fortunately or unfortunately, the most defined opportunity we know is a job. So in other words, you're asking me, how can an engineer get a job in a county government? Now, I'll look the other way around. So even when I talked about South Korea growing, the people who grew South Korea are not the government people. It was Hyundai, Samsung, and the other chaebols like LG. So we need, might take my personal opinion, we need to focus more on that. As a people, we must detach from the idea of going to school to fit into a job that is already created. And especially in an era where it is too disruptive in terms of technology. And we must also be driven by self-interest. If you focus on your self-interest as an engineer, you'd never look for an opportunity in a county government because it will never remunerate you enough. You can get much more from what you've learned without focusing there. So if I'm to answer that question in a single line, brand those opportunities, create new ones outside of that area.
All right. I believe we've had a very informative session. Do we have questions from the audience? Maybe we can take one or two. Najua tuko njaa. None? Okay. There's one? Okay.
Round of applause for Adrian as he comes to the stage.
Yes, good evening. My name is Adrian Kinyaweru, as I've heard. So my question is only one. During the speech you gave us, or the points that you are saying, one, you said that during the committee or the meetings in Parliament you usually have for creating the policies rather. So my question was, by the time that you're in the chair of the budget committee, what were the policies, or what were the key points or key areas that looks in, especially in this sector of engineering, that you can share or enlighten us, that maybe are new and maybe not many people know about it?
That's a good question. Unfortunately, all that we deal with is in public domain. So it may not be secretive. I may not give you a secret of opportunities because budgets are usually public documents. But I have seen a deceleration in terms of spending in infrastructure. Maybe Engineer Kinoti had noted that. If you compare, for example, this year's budget with the last one, we continue to spend less in development. So that then tells you, Wero, that we may not continue to be absorbed through public spending or our brains. And I'm talking about all of us in this hall. Opportunities may be out there. Because if budgets for critical infrastructure continues to diminish in aggregate terms, and also as a share of the total cake, then in my opinion, there are better opportunities out there. But the other thing I have seen, as a person who is graduating now, you may do a study and realize most of the people who work for Kera, Kura, Kera, Kenha, Kura, Kera, you will trace they are almost the same age. Because when entities are created, like the ones that were created then, now government hired them. So I'm just trying to tell you, even as you look for opportunities in such areas, it is good for you to face the reality. I have, for example, done a basic research. Out of the regional managers of Kera, you realize almost all of them were classmates. Because this authority was created at a point where then it hired these people. And after hiring, they never needed to hire much more. So I see more opportunities outside because government spending continues to shrink. One, because the kind of infrastructure that was done for the past 10 years was done on borrowed money. Now, when times comes to pay, the urgency becomes on paying for what is already done, other than fundraising for what needs to be done.
Have you been answered? Okay, very well said. Thank you so much, Mheshimiwa, for coming and gracing us today. We have another question. Rais. Joe.
Thank you, Debbie. Mheshimiwa, I just have one question. You said that as fresh graduates, we need to think of how we can start our own businesses and become creative in various avenues. But if you have to be very frank with you as students, of course, we all know that the major problem that we have as youth is lack of resources. I'm sure most of us have big ideas, and Sharif there can tell you he wants to become a contractor, but he lacks the finances to start his own company. And by the time that he starts working, till he builds his own money to start a company, it will take so much time. And before you came, Engineer Nyoro said that we have a problem of poor financial management, which is very true. So by the time that I get enough capital to start a business, it will take so much time. And yes, you said that South Korea and much of the Asian Tigers companies were where we were back then, and that they were able to grow. But there's also this point that at least for them, I'm sure, of course I've done some little reading, but for them after the war that they had, like South Korea, Taiwan, the world invested more into their countries, even China. The world gave them funding and then they're able now to reinvest themselves. But not for us as Kenya, we lack that funding as a nation, whereby that I can get money to start up my company. So that's where we get beaten. And as much as, yes, we have the ideas, but hakuna pesa kwa mfuko. Na hata hiyo ile help pia haitoshi ya kuanza biashara, kama ni kuna hustler fund si mingi ya kuanzisha biashara. So how now can we access funds? Na pia ukiomba mzazi pesa, pia hana pesa. So just tell us how we can be able to earn money or to source funding to start our own businesses, so that we as well, we can become rich as you and as our mentors here. That's all. Now, thank you so much. Before I end, by the way, Mheshimiwa played a key role in my campaigns. Thank you so much on behalf of me and the team. Ubarikiwe sana. Asante sana.
Thank you very much, President. There is some inaccuracy in terms of the countries that I cited. Those countries never leaped forward based on external money. It was based on internal resources, but depending on external markets. When you talk about South Korea, there is no company you'll mention that is not globally domiciled in South Korea that is not South Korean. The multinational you see in South Korea, what they have done is to get out of South Korea. It is not other multinationals from other companies that have gone into South Korea. The same with China. China opened up much later. The policies they were making were leveraging on external market, but using internal resources. And resources is not always about money. Resources is also about labor. For example, if you look at some of those economies, inaendanga hii inaachia hiyo. This is what I mean. If you look at Japan, the primary level of production of Japan was basic manufacturing. Then, after investing in basic manufacturing, the owners of capital got more capital out of the profits and upgraded it to more sophisticated manufacturing. What they did is that labor became too expensive in Japan. They could no longer do plywoods or do apparels. They handed that over to countries like South Korea. South Korea did dried fish, like these big companies we see, Samsung, LG, and the rest. They were doing basic manufacturing, including apparels, dried fish, bicycles. Then after absorbing too much labor, and the owners of capital got money, then they upgrade into more sophisticated manufacturing again. Then that company, labor becomes too competitive that a South Korean can no longer afford to do apparels because the productivity there is not commensurate to the opportunities in the economy. So that company then hands over to Vietnam, for example. Then Vietnam does the same and hands over to the next one. So you realize now in that frame, they are using internal companies, mostly internal resources, but more importantly, internal people, internal labor. So it's only when labor becomes too productive or you mechanize too much and it is no longer a labor-intensive venture that you hand over to the next country, and then you upgrade to the one that you require less labor, pay that labor more expensive because you have mechanized more. So domestic resources can do a lot, and especially when you make a policy that is eyeing markets beyond the local one. Now, in terms of now micro, that one was more macro. Micro is the one you asked about. You are telling us to start businesses, but the biggest handicap is capital. I do not find better way to answer that than to look at the graduates like you, those we can call mentors, what preceded. Was it capital or the idea? Now you realize in this country today, there are many people who would want to find good ideas which can be commercialized to become businesses, but they don't know where to find them. Then you ask yourself, the owner of the idea and the one with the capital, who is to look for the other? For example, if I ask all of us here in this hall, who has ever cared to look for the venture capital companies in Kenya today? People in this hall. Who knows any private equity fund in Kenya that exists in Kenya today? Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft only became what they are. Not because of the idea of Bill Gates, not primarily because only of the idea of Mark Zuckerberg or of Jeff Bezos, but also on the seed capital and the venture capitalists who invested in them early. So, for money to come, there has to be an idea. And that is why you always see the intersection of the tech in the US, answering even that micro question, is, or a question that is speaking to an individual, not just the macros, was an intersection where a good idea in universities like Stanford or Harvard gets a hungry investor in the name of a venture capital or an angel investor or a private equity, and that intersection of Wall Street and the universities creates what we call the Silicon Valley. But money alone will not make a Silicon Valley. It is money and the idea. Now you look at what do I have now? What I have now is an idea. My advice is keep polishing it up. Then on the other person with the money, what I have is the money. What I don't have is the idea. It's for them to continue looking for the most polished idea. That intersection creates a commercial company where you now commercialize your idea.
Very, very well said. We have questions from our team. Yes? 2 questions from the DDOS and from Engineer Nyoro.
Thank you, Mheshimiwa. My name is Johnson Kinywa, the Dean of Students, taking care of these students. When Losha left the office, the incoming government said one of their handicaps is the resource. So this is a rejoinder question to Losha. They said they want to know about resource mobilization and partnership. So in their training next